So for this last piece, I'm doing kind of the split between the digital work and some writing. Um, Mostly the writing will be kind of a verbal version of how I go through, and this is kind of cleaning up the dot points of what I'm thinking. Now, for my thing, I'm picking kind of the subject of subtitles versus dubbings, mostly focusing on anime or thing. I'll go into that in detail in a sec. Basically, I picked this up because I'm interested in the subject, and I thought this would be a good. This is a cultural keystone of understanding anime and things, and I thought this would be a good thing. And I mostly took it off from watching mainly Akira and Godzilla, as well as watching actually a YouTube thing done by the Team 4-Star of DBZ Abridged. Now, I started with a sub versus dub argument and kind of, I thought I'd do an interesting thing of, going through, let's give a list of, sub versus dub, which you do. So, example being like, the big three, Naruto, Bleach, One Piece. And then I realized, wait, there's so much to these things in this sense. Like, Dragon Ball, all that stuff. You've got so many versions of it. You've got the sub, which all has, which has the original thing, but yeah. And then you have the dubs, which, Naruto, there's probably one known dub. Bleach, there's one known dub. One Piece is unique though. It has one or two known dubs, as well as Dragon Ball having maybe about three different known dubs. For One Piece, you've got the Four Kids and Funimation, and then for Dragon Ball, you've got Funimation and Ocean, and there's one last one. I can't think off the top of my head, Blue Water or something. But that's where I wanted to start. So I started with this whole, what is sub versus dub? Where's the auto-ethnic role? Look at this. So I started, comparing those. And mainly I went back to what we watched. We watched Akira in dub. We watched the original Godzilla in a sub, as well as watching Shin as a sub later. And those became my focus for my study, pretty much. So, focusing on the sub versus dub thing, I went in going Akira, and I more or less looked at it as a sense of, Akira is one of the best anime you can see, as I already have looked at it previously in my blogs. It's that whole argument of what's good or what's bad. And with it, I kind of went back and forth about, the sub is the original audio. I wrote about that. And I looked at it in the sense that also the dub is Western actors giving that sense. So I kind of looked at that, and when I tried to connect it to my autoethnography look at this, I found it difficult because I was mostly I'm looking at the Western side of this. I'm looking at my Western understanding of this. I don't get the Japanese culture is there in the movie, and some of it is thing, but I see a lot of Western connection to it, and that plays into my later revelations, which I'll get to about a bit in, but that's my next thing. So then moving on to Godzilla, we watched it in sub, and I think it's probably the way to watch Godzilla at this point, as well as Shin, which I think is the other important thing. And with it, it's interesting because in the sub one I realized, and I've started realizing my thing, which I'll get to in a sec, is that I talk about it's all about the culture. The whole movie is about the culture of Japan dealing with Godzilla. It's a social commentary and a cultural commentary of what's happening in it. And I then go on to say, I think the sub is best for this situation because you get the Japanese voice actors reacting to it. It's a thing that I think But then I realized as I was doing it, I was also going, but there was also something else there that I realized I was looking at it all the time, the word translation. And I realized that was the key part of my look at this, is that it's translation. I'm looking at sub and dub. You can compare them all you want, but the whole point is the translation. And I realized I've been looking at, that should have been my autobiography, and I've changed it, and I switched it halfway, and that's why I went into. Now, when I realized this, so looking at this, I realized that subs are, written words, but it's a script. You put a script underneath the movie, basically, for mostly Westerners who don't understand Japanese. and then dubbing is just an English person dubbing over. It's a reason why I also found an interesting thing in a recently new started thing by the Team 4 Stars, 4 Star Bento, which did a Saturday. I'll double check the name now. It was Saturday Morning Sushi, I believe, but it was basically the Untold Legacy of Voltron. It's called Voltron, being an the 80s or 90s cartoon that was a dubbing by English group things of that period, and in itself, rather cool example of them. But I think I'll get back to the other two before I tackle the Voltron bit, because I think that's the thing. Realizing that's what it is, I looked at Akira again and realized, what we listened to was the English voice cast talking about it. We're listening to the English voice cast reading of a translation and their translation of the scene. We're seeing their cultural view of the Japanese script in this case. And I think Akira is a good thing for the subvert dub, but I don't think that's about how far I got there. The next one that I found really interesting, I think, was where I stuck on it when we watched, not the Godzilla. I think Godzilla itself has its own, the original Godzilla has its own things, but I think I got stuck on Shin again, because I think I like Shin more as a film mostly, and it has some interesting things to it, I think. Improve Godzilla mythos, and also improve kind of a film commentary. In the case of like the original Godzilla, I'd think the translation and all that stuff, we get the Japanese talking in their own way. It's all the wording, all the translation is very formal. It's the original Japanese part of it. But Shin, especially this one scene that I remember, is when they're talking about solutions, and they have the American scientists in it. And the American scientists, even in English, which also comes through in the sub, if you're listening to the sub, says, well, we have to solve this with our nuclear knowledge. Or wisdom. One of those two words. Not nuclear power, not nukes, nuclear knowledge. Realizing, I picked up on there as well. I'm like, why would that be? Is that a cultural reason that they used knowledge, not power, not nukes? Is it a translation thing? Is it something that came out of the script? Because it's obviously said by the thing, so that's another weird translation throw. And I think tying into this, it's all about how people view it and who produces the thing. You watch fan subs as well. They're all translation done by people who know Japanese but are trying to adapt something into English where there might not exactly be that. That's one cool aspect of it. And I think the Voltron thing covers that best, because Voltron isn't actually just one thing. It's two anime series combined into one. It's something that shouldn't have been taken by, corporate people who wanted to make toys. They did so much to the original Voltron as well. They removed death scenes. They made any kind of references to biblical or anything like that. Saturday morning cartoons, they changed the names is the other big thing of that. It's the reason why I'm interested in kind of, like, we don't get it in Voltron thing. We get it in Pokemon, actually. That's a good one I left out, which I realized. You get Pokemon, all that stuff, which goes on about, it changes stuff because it's not what we're viewing in our culture. In Japanese culture, you have all these anime, which I'd have to double check. I don't really know the original Voltron or well, in this case, Gal Rangers or something like that. Something along the lines, whether they were designed for kids or not. I'd assume they would be. But they pretty much, reversed and engineered it and took away any of the interesting Japanese stuff because that's who they were selling to. They were selling to the Western culture, not the Japanese culture, and they changed it for that. It's a reason why I think with my revelation, that's the two different things. If I go back to it, I'd say probably, if I'm looking at the sub versus dub thing I started with, anime sub versus dub is completely down to the viewer. It's what they understand. It's what they want to see. It's actually also, time and production affects it, in a sense that the Voltron one, or even Akira, or those people who produce them have different views when they produce them, therefore get different things. Thus, Voltron not the two different Japanese versions you got. You don't none of that. But then getting into the translation one, I think that's the more interesting aspect of it, especially with my look at it, is that I realized that as a method, the method brought, like, I was looking at some other stuff, and the method brought up, I want to look at translation. And that's what I've tried to look at. I'm probably going a little bit over time, but I think I want to try and go a little bit more time with some stuff, because I think in the explanations I give, we'll go into detail on each of them, but I think the key thing I'm looking at in this auto-economic look at it, is that I realized from looking at an argument about whether you look at this translation or that translation, the translation is the interesting thing, and it's not always right. That's why we have different things said in different movies, Voltron being completely different from what the original things are, and Godzilla having the word nuclear knowledge, not nuclear power. Was that a translation thing, or was that a script thing? I had a look in, but I couldn't find anything solid about Godzilla. I think I've kind of look. It's a bit lost here, but I think coming back to it, I think the sub versus dub thing came down to translation. I realized that translation is how you understand it. I'm realizing the culture I'm looking at still is Western, but I think I've reconnected it a little bit more with the Asian part, where the understanding that the things that you consume, the anime you consume, is a translation of Japanese culture into a Western culture, a Western language you can understand. And I think that's what interests me in this subject, and what I should continue with if I want to revisit this. And that's 2 minutes over. I will leave it at that.